Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 81 to 100. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 81. Well guys, this is the end of the first volume and I have to say I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. I hope you liked this introduction to Adrian Kenway, and that you are enjoying his story. Tomorrow the second volume will start, so stay tuned. I want to reveal a few little things about why I decided to write this book. Simply since I read Lord of the Mysteries for the first time, I have had this desire to write a story about this crazy world. But I never had the confidence to do it, when one day in December 2022 the inspiration to write this story struck me. I hope you keep reading and see you tomorrow. As always, please comment something. I always love to read your thoughts. Volume 2 Chapter 82. Darkness was all he could see. He couldn't see his arms or legs, only nothingness. But he could feel his body and everything hurt. He felt like he was going to break into pieces at any moment. This is the afterlife. Does hell even exist in this world? Despite the enormous pain, Adrian knew very well that he had died. He could remember how the demon woman slammed him to the ground 2 times, but after that he couldn't remember much more, just the feeling of something very hot running through his shattered chest. Adrian didn't know where he was or what this dark place was supposed to be. Trying to move his arms despite the horrible sensation of breaking, Adrian felt like he was swimming in a very strange pool. Growling, Adrian tried to swim somewhere, but even though he felt like he was advancing around him, it didn't change anything. Looking around, Adrian kept moving as his body seemed to be about to break. He couldn't sit still as he felt that if he did he would be stuck here forever, so he just kept swimming in nothingness trying to find a way out. After what seemed like an eternity to Adrian, he managed to see something appear in the distance, so he hurried to not lost sight of it. The closer he got, the more Adrian felt a familiarity with this object until he managed to reach it and was able to see it head on. This was his body as Adrian Kenway, although it looked like it had been smashed with a hammer. Ads by PubFuture. His arms and legs were bent at ridiculous angles. He could even see how the bone was going through his flesh and clothes. His chest was definitely the worst part, as he could see how his ribs were going through it. There was also a large hole in the middle of it from the left pectoral to the end of the right, being just as thick as a bottle of 1L. Seeing the state of his body, Adrian only let out a dry laugh while shaking his head. That bitch destroyed us, right mate, and we weren't the only ones. He could still see how that demon woman had killed the 2 Nighthawks along with that Punisher. But what he could best see was how that woman's arm had penetrated Grievous's chest, killing him. I just hope the others managed to save themselves. He knew that Charles, Isaac and Victor were still there while everything was happening. If with how quickly the fire spread and the destruction that the woman has caused in her fight against the officers, and combining his experience with how the fires treated the buildings, he knew that the hall would not have taken much longer to collapse on all of them. If the hall hadn't fallen shortly after that he was killed, then the chances of them surviving weren't too high. Letting out a heavy sigh, Adrian looked around trying to find something else, but the only thing that was in all this emptiness was his corpse and him. Looking again at his body, Adrian looked at his face this time and could see how there were multiple cuts on it, and his red eyes that before shone like rubies were now dull as if they had lost that edge they had. What am I supposed to do? He talked to himself while looking at his body. Having nothing to lose, Adrian reached his hand up to his body, touching the hole in it. Ads by PubFuture. Thankfully he could now use his body as a kind of light source in this black void. Now he could see that his arm was pure darkness. That's why I could feel it but not see it. Wasn't it because of the darkness that I couldn't see it, but that I am the darkness? Looking at his arm in alarm, Adrian could see how a small light began to form where it had touched his body. This light was getting stronger and stronger, and he could feel how it was burning his arm, and the black void was boiling as if he didn't want this light in him. But the light just kept growing more and more, and the redhead could see how the darkness that encircled his arm was disappearing, and the pain he felt before was getting worse and worse until the point that Adrian was screaming. He tried to pull his hand away from his body, but it seemed stuck and he couldn't move it, and the pain just kept increasing. Adrian could feel his soul wanting to break apart, but it was barely holding together. When the light was close to its strongest point, Adrian managed to see how the darkness on his arm had completely disappeared, allowing him to see it, and the appearance of it scared him. His arm was extremely pale and looked like it had shattered like glass but had been reattached with black glue. Adrian could see the cracks all over his arm and he was pretty sure the rest of himself was the same. Before he could continue to see his arm, the light had reached its strongest point and engulfed him and his body. While the light completely enveloped him, some voices began to reach his ears. These voices contained many others, men, women, boys, girls, old men and women. But all these repeated the same thing with great devotion. The fire of destruction that eradicated depravity. Incarnation of calamities. The closest to the oldest one. The sentence seemed to be incomplete, but before Adrian could try to understand what was missing from it, the light enveloped him completely, leaving the void of darkness. A symbol also appeared in his mind, this symbol being a red bloody spear wrapped by the symbol of infinity, and at the bottom there was a closed book. The familiar rap of the true creator was playing in his ear and he knew that he had come back to life. Adrian opened his eyes and the first thing he saw was a huge hole in how the ceiling was being covered in flames. Processing what was happening, Adrian felt great pain but couldn't scream. There was no air in his lungs as they had been shattered by the witch's magma sword. Even now he could feel the hole in his chest, and as he choked, the hole closed at a ridiculous speed and Adrian was able to swallow air. Taking a deep breath, Adrian raised his head and could see how the hole had finished closing and the bones of his ribs returned to their place. The bones in his arms and legs were rearranging and healing very fast, and it didn't take more than 30 seconds for his body to be like new. The same couldn't be said of his more than 10-pound suit, which was now completely destroyed. Adrian shakily stood up just like when he first woke up in that cave and removed the burnt band from his left arm because the wrap was already being too annoying. Looking around, Adrian saw that he was in a large basement filled with rubble and at the end was a corridor. But the most important thing he saw was Mr. Grievous, who was face down and on his back was a red stone. There were also the corpses of the Punishers and Nighthawks on the left, and they also had their respective stones. Adrian rushed over to Grievous's body and knelt beside him. Grievous had his eyes closed and his monocle was broken in half. A few meters from him was Hangover Time. Smoke was already filling the basement and Adrian could only grab Grievous's features and place it in his pocket and also grab Hangover Time and put it in another. Carefully turning Grievous's body over, the redhead began to head towards the corridor from before. Ads by PubFuture. Moving quickly down the hall in search of a set of stairs, Adrian passed through an open door and paused as he returned to the door. Inside was a familiar brown-haired man stuffing multiple items into a bag before getting up and turning around to see Adrian looking at him. Dutch. Mr. Adrian, you are still alive. Dutch, whose suit was covered in dust and quite damaged, saw the redhead as if he were a ghost. Shaking his head, the nobleman just grabbed his bag and quickly ran, leaving the place, leaving behind Adrian, who was still carrying Grievous's body. We have to leave now, was what the man yelled as he ran away. Looking at the back of Dutch, who kept running without looking back to make sure he was being followed, Adrian was about to follow him when he looked into the room where Dutch was. It was filled with various rare items such as knight armor, ancient mirrors, paintings, and also had a good amount of mystic-related materials. Looking at this room, Adrian looked back to where Dutch had run and could only grunt as he entered it, still holding Grievous's body. Gently placing Grievous on the floor, Adrian quickly began to search through the mystic materials trying to find something. Finding some red candles along with some red poppies, Adrian placed them neatly on the floor. First came the candles and after these came the red poppies forming the tip of a spear, and after that he drew the symbol he saw before. Taking off the hidden blade along with the magician's glove, he placed them on the tip of this spear. He also did the same with the burnt band and Grievous characteristics. After that he got to his knees, clasping his hands and closing his eyes, Adrian began to pray in ancient Hermes. The fire of destruction that eradicated depravity. Incarnation of calamities. The closest to the oldest one. Ads by PubFuture. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to take this offerings. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. Some murmurs began to ring in Adrian's ears, who did not hesitate and quickly began to form the sphere of light and entered the city of calamities. Looking around, Adrian saw a small orange flame pulsating in the air to his side. Extending his spirituality to the flame, it became a door of fire that allowed him to see himself on his knees, and in front of him were all his things. Stretching out his hand and clenching it slightly as if grabbing something, Adrian used the power of the City of Calamities to attract the objects there. All these started to float and then they were absorbed by the door of fire, and after they all passed through the door, Adrian stopped passing spirituality, causing the door of fire to close. Having done all this, Adrian used the power of the Sephiroth again to envelop these objects in yellowish smoke, and after all this, Adrian redrew the sphere of light, leaving the city. Returning to his body and seeing that none of the objects had been left behind, Adrian returned with Grievous's body, and after lifting him up in his arms he ran where Dutch had gone. Using his skill as a hunter, he was able to easily follow Dutch's path and managed to reach a door that was open directly to the outside. Running towards this, Adrian crossed it and saw that it was in the garden of the mansion. Turning around, Adrian managed to see how the mansion was burning not far away. He also saw how a part was already collapsed and there were many people in the garden. Seeing that there were survivors, Adrian began to search among all of them, and luckily he managed to find Charles along with his wife, who were kneeling embracing, and Isaac, who was hugging his wife but could not find Victor anywhere. He was unable to continue searching because a large group of officers rushed towards them. Until officers finally arrive, Adrian thought angrily as he looked at this. Watching as the policemen were running towards them, Adrian could also see how a sudden storm appeared and was putting out the flames in the mansion. While he was drenched by the drops of water that were slowly cleaning the blood that covered him, Adrian gently placed Grievous's body on the garden grass. Grasping Grievous's arms, he delicately placed them across his chest crosswise, after which he took off his black coat and placed it on top of the man covering him. Now clad in a white shirt that had turned pink from blood and was torn apart, Adrian sat on the grass next to Grievous's body as he watched as this storm put out the fire. This party was a disaster, wasn't it, Mr. Grievous? Even knowing that the man was no longer going to answer him, Adrian continued speaking while the drops of water hit him. You know, when I first met you, you seemed like a shameless old man and I wanted to punch that monocle off your face. As the policemen began to surround the survivors with weapons raised and with great carriages arriving ready to take away the survivors, looking around, Adrian continued speaking. But you grew on me, you know. You reminded me a lot of my previous uncle. He was also shameless. Because he also had a very similar humor to you. He loved to provoke people and he expected these people to respond the same or worse. Growing up, he always bothered me because my front teeth had gone bad. They had come out very front and was very much like a fictional character named Timmy Turner. Ads by PubFuture. He even said that if a car were to run over me, my teeth would flatten the car's tire. Giving a light laugh, Adrian placed a hand on Grievous's covered chest. His nicknames ranged from Tire Spikers to Market Dracula. I hated him for a long time because of how much he bullied me. But when I grew up, I learned several things from him, for example that he was very hairy, and when I say very hairy, I mean it. Letting out a louder laugh, Adrian patted Grievous lightly as he wiped a tear from his eye. He looked like a bear with so much hair that he had, so I started giving him nicknames based on this: Bigfoot, Malnourished Bear, and Hairy Ass. When I started doing that, he began to treat me better. Of course he still bothered me because of my teeth, but I bothered him with his hairy body. You could say that that made us closer. Watching as the policemen began to escort the survivors away, starting with the women, Adrian sighed as he ran a hand through his wet hair, removing the hairs that bothered his eyes. The more I chatted with you, the more I realized how similar you were to my uncle. I think that's why I enjoyed spending time with you at the shooting range or just chatting over wine or coffee. It was a real pleasure to have met you, Mr. Grievous, and I must admit that you are a real man. Remembering how Grievous, despite having seen how a Beyander with a higher sequence than him was easily killed, he still attacked that woman. I hope wherever you are, I'm sure you're having a great time drinking wine and provoking others. Ads by PubFuture. Watching as the policeman began loading the men into another carriage and one was approaching him, Adrian patted Grievous's arms lightly. Rest in peace, old fool. Sir, you have to come with us. We can't stay here. Someone else will come to take care of the body of your loved one. Looking at this policeman, who seemed to be in his late 30s and with a hard look in his eyes, Adrian nodded as he got up and followed the policeman to a large carriage where he got on, but before entering he looked over at Grievous, who now had a man in a black suit and black hat next to him who had realized he was being watched. Seeing Adrian, the man gave him a slight nod before gently grabbing Grievous's body. The redhead nodded as well as he entered the large carriage. Looking at those inside, Adrian didn't recognize anyone, so sitting down next to a man who was hugging himself, trembling slightly, the redhead looked at the ground as the carriage began to leave the area. Inside the vandalized mansion right now there were 3 people staring at each other while standing next to the big hole. One of them was an old man with silver eyes, he wore a soft hat and a black robe with the symbol of the Lord of Storms embroidered on it. The other was also an old man in white priest's robes and a cleric's cap. His face was usually kind, but this time his face showed coldness and anger. And the last one was an old man with deeply recessed eyes, wearing a black and red archbishop's robe and a 5 Evernight sacred emblem on his chest. He had an extremely clean appearance. The 3 of them were looking at the large hole in the ground as various teams appeared around them carrying the bodies of their fallen members. The old man who wore the black robe with the symbol of the Lord of Storms turned to look at the other 2 as he spoke with a heavy and furious voice. This area was supposed to be under the protection of MI9, so how is it possible for something like this to happen? When he said that, bolts of electricity began to envelop his body. Looking around for the 10th time in the last 30 minutes, Adrian saw again that he was in a small gray room in which the only furniture was a table and 2 chairs, the only lighting being a light bulb that was hung above the table. They had brought him here a few hours after they had arrived at the station where all the party survivors who were in good condition were being questioned. Adrian was still wearing the same clothes he had on when he left to the mansion's garden. The redhead had his arms on the table as he played with a button of his shirt that no longer had much purpose. From the looks of it, they were still trying to find out what had happened at the party and who had been the participants in that great battle in the hall. After another 5 minutes, a middle-aged man with pale blonde hair and gray eyes walked through the door with some documents in hand as he sat across from the redhead. "Mr. Adrian, I'm sorry to bother you, but we need your testimony on what happened the day before." Placing the documents in front of the redhead, he was showing them to him one by one. They were a series of photos of the room that showed the damage it had suffered along with certain annotations on them. "Something's wrong, he is being too nice," the redhead thought as he narrowed his eyes and grabbed the first photo. This photo was of a part of a wall in the hall where you could clearly see large cuts along it, obviously made by the skills of one of the wind-blessed who was at the party. Adrian began to describe what he had seen in good detail, setting it aside without much trouble, although the feeling of discomfort did not leave him. After describing everything he could, he watched as the man in front of him nodded before pointing to the other photos. Adrian began to do the same with each of them until he finally got to the last one that made him freeze. It was Robert's body on top of an iron table of the kind used in morgues, and it looked like it had been opened because of the very recognizable Y on his torso. There was a special detail in Robert, and it was that his blonde hair was now brown. Looking up, Adrian watched as the man had a cold look on his face as he snapped his fingers and 2 other men entered. Ads by PubFuture. "Mr. Adrian, could you tell me if you recognize this man?" as he said that he lightly touched the photo of Robert's body. "I have to play my cards right or I'm going to die," Aga Adrian thought as a cold sweat ran down his back. Now he did not have any weapons or sealed artifacts with him because he had sent them inside the City of Calamities to avoid being taken from him and to avoid being discovered. It seems that they had a talk with Charles before and he had told them what he had seen, so he would have to maneuver between that. This would be the most difficult test of his ability. The man in front of him was most likely in mid-sequence, so he had to be extremely careful with his words. "Don't talk too little and don't talk too much. I know him. He was my friend Robert Patino." Adrian felt how an electric current began to run through his body, causing him to start grunting in pain. "What do you mean with was?" The man's deep voice rang through the room as the current increased in intensity. Because he tried to kill me from behind, and he tried to kill my FR friend," the redhead snarled as he held his head and clenched his teeth. "And what did you do then?" "I killed him with my hands before he could harm him." The current increased in power, causing Adrian to have to hold on to the table as he growled louder. This pain was nowhere near the pain he endured when he first heard the true creator's rap, nor when the white light enveloped him, so it was tolerable, but he had to fake it to avoid attracting attention. Seeing that Adrian wasn't screaming in pain, the man frowned as he spoke again. "Your friend is Charles, correct?" Charles, why yes, it is him." According to his words, he told how you came out of the shadows and shot Robert who was attacking him. Then Robert charged at you and disarmed you before trying to stab you, but you reflected it with a blade before stabbing him in the heart. How did you do it? Ads by PubFuture. The pain had increased, causing Adrian to fall to his knees as he groaned in pain and tears fell from his eyes. Adrian tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out of his mouth, so biting his tongue hard he managed to speak. ID didn't come out of the shadows BU, but ICA came out from Robert's blind SP spot while IW was shooting at him B, but before firing he threw a dagger at me and D disarmed me, then he tried to attack me but I used a knife to deflect it and then stabbed him in the heart. So you are saying that Mr. Charles saw wrong with what you did? Growling loudly, Adrian looked up at the man and as he spoke between snarls he answered. Charles W. was too scared to the point that he didn't see Robert AP approaching him until he was in front of him. He must have confused the way AP paired with coming out of the shadows. Looking at the red eyes of the redhead who was kneeling breathing hard, the man got up and stood in front of him. Last question, Mr. Adrian, are you a Beander? Now the pain had increased considerably and Adrian moaned more as he looked back at the floor. I'm not sir, and but I know of their existence, so please stop, I can't take it anymore. When Adrian said that, the pain disappeared and he fell to the ground gasping for breath as drool came out of his mouth. Observing the man on the ground, the interrogator only clicked his tongue as he turned to look at the men who had entered. Get him out of here, he doesn't know anything. The men nodded as they grabbed Adrian's arms and carried him out of the room, leaving only the interrogator who looked at the door where his men had left the room. At no time he lies, so he really is just a normal person. The man thought as he took out a cigarette and lit it. While smoking, the man just shook his head as he went to his next interrogation. This would undoubtedly be a heavy day for him. Adrian was now inside a police carriage on the way home. Adrian still felt very dizzy, but he couldn't understand why. That interrogation was not at all close to what I felt when I was in that black space, so why did it make me so weak? The redhead looked at his hand, which was pale along with the rest of his body. Remembering what had happened inside that black space, a possibility formed in his head. Am I still suffering from resurrection aftereffects? This was the highest possibility. That interrogation should not have left him in such a delicate state. At first he was acting, but the more the interrogator used his ability, the weaker he felt. Whip of pain, if he remembered correctly, attacked the soul of the person who received it, so the man was attacking his soul weakened by the resurrection. But that revealed an even bigger problem, that there was a huge problem with his soul. Adrian could still see the black cracks in his arm as the light brought him back to life, but he didn't understand what it meant. If that was really his soul and it was in such a delicate state, then how was it possible that he could have even drank the Sequence 9 potion? Before he could think about this further, the police carriage stopped and someone opened the door of the carriage. We have arrived, sir, you can come down. Nodding to the policeman, Adrian got out of the carriage and stopped in front of his house. Sir, I recommend that you rest these days and not go to work because of what you had to go through. If you like, I can recommend a good psychologist. Hearing the words of the officer, who didn't seem to be more than 26 years old, the redhead only gave him a slight smile. Ads by PubFuture. Thank you very much, officer, but I'll have to reject it. Have a good day. When he said that, Adrian went and entered his house, leaving the policeman outside who, seeing that the redhead had left him outside, sighed as he got into his carriage and left the place. Being inside his house, Adrian, the first thing he did was take off his clothes and lit the fireplace in his house and threw his expensive clothes into the fire to burn. Watching how the fire consumed his clothes while he was naked. Good thing my money is in my closet of calamities because I totally forgot about it, Adrian thought with a flat face as he went to his bathroom to take a good shower. As the water washed the ash, dust, and blood from his body, Adrian let his mind drift back to the scene he had seen and heard while he was resurrected. That name should be the honorary name of the fallen god related to my awakening here, but what is, closest to the oldest one, supposed to mean? Also remembering the symbol that he had seen, a chill ran down the redhead's back while the water continued to fall on him. And that should be his symbol, but again, what is it supposed to mean? Without a doubt it is related to the path of the hunter, but there were things that did not fit in it. Why was the infinity symbol wrapped around the spear, and what did that book mean? Feeling another strong chill, Adrian grabbed the shampoo and washed his head vigorously to distract himself. Leaving the shower with a towel on his hip, Adrian entered his room and after drying himself, he put on black pants but was shirtless as he looked at himself in the mirror. I just hope Isengard doesn't suffer too much from this, the relationship between Grievous and Isengard seemed pretty good, so Adrian could only get an idea of how the detective would take it. Although remembering what kind of man he is, he wouldn't know for sure this. I also have to see a funeral for the old man. Ads by PubFuture. Sighing again, Adrian sat where he was for a long time. As sunset came on, Adrian could feel his eyes getting heavy, so he just settled where he was and slept. After a while, Adrian opened his eyes as he listened to someone knock on the door. Looking around, Adrian noticed that everything seemed to have a slight haze as he sat at his living room table. Wait, is this a dream? This immediately put him on alert, but just as quickly he calmed down and acted as if nothing had happened. It must be a Nighthawk who came to question me, and what better method than dreams, so I better act like I am in one. Hearing the knock on the door again, Adrian slightly closed his eyes and spoke in a sleepy voice. Please come in. When he said that, he saw how a man in his late 30s with the bangs of his white hair walked in while holding his mid-height hat. Sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Adrian, I would like to ask you a few questions. The man's voice was soft, making Adrian a bit sleepy, but he still kept up his act. Ask then, sir. The man removed his hat and placed it on his chest as he sat down across from Adrian. I'm Watson Uleb, nice to meet you. Adrian took advantage of the fact that the man had brought his hands to his chest and looked at them. Seeing that he was only wearing black gloves, the redhead let out an internal sigh as he responded. What would you like to know, Mr. Watson? At this, the one called Watson gave a light smile as he placed his hat on his lap. Please tell me what happened at the party on Saturday, June 30th. Giving a weak nod, Adrian began to tell everything he had seen at the party and how he had to kill his friend to protect another. While he was telling all this, Adrian observed how Watson nodded from time to time, and at some details he frowned. When he got to the detail of the final fight, Adrian had completely put aside his and Grievous's involvement in it, replacing it with that of Grievous with that of an unknown hooded man who could control fire. At this, Watson frowned again and interrupted Adrian's explanation. Wasn't it your shooting master who had fought the witches while controlling the fire? No, Mr. Watson, although my shooting master fought, he only used a revolver. The one who was fighting while controlling the fire was the hooded man. This was a spur-of-the-moment invention that Adrian had come up with, replicating what Oliver Queen once did when questioned. It helped a lot that Watson thought he was telling the truth, not doubting that the redhead was never under his control. Watson frowned again as he raised a hand to his mouth and thought for a moment before lowering his hand as he asked. Could you show me what this hooded man looks like? I have no idea, Watson, but I'll try. Adrian swallowed as he tried to imagine what this hooded man would look like. Suddenly next to him appeared a tall man wrapped in a black sack who wore a strange mask that covered his face. This was his appearance as Mr. Chaplin, and Adrian decided to wear this because it was the best option he could think of. Ads by PubFuture. Seeing the figure next to Adrian, Watson's frown deepened before he looked back at Adrian. Mr. Adrian, are you sure this is the man you saw fight? Giving a weak nod, Adrian replied with a sleepy voice. Yes, it's him. Nodding, Watson got up from his seat and headed for Adrian's door as he put his hat back on. Turning to look at the sleepy Adrian, the man gave a small bow before opening the door. Have a good night, Mr. Adrian. When he said that, the door closed completely and the dream that Adrian was in gradually dissipated until he woke up in the same place where he had fallen asleep. Adrian got up from his bed and went for a walk around his house for a moment before going back to his room and laying down on his bed again. Watson was very lucky because he did not enter the redhead's house, since it was most likely that he had eaten multiple traps prepared by the red-eyed man. Covering himself with his blanket, Adrian lay down on his bed and tried to sleep again. Finally, after a few hours, the redhead managed to sleep and did not wake up until 2 p.m. the next day. With a dry throat, the redhead brushed his teeth and putting on his usual clothes, he left his house. Walking through some stores and then going to a flower shop, Adrian returned home with a bag in his hands along with some flowers wrapped in his hands. These flowers were red poppies. Ads by PubFuture. Now in his room, Adrian put the red poppies back like last time and placed the red poppies in a spear shape. Then he redraw the symbol that represented that fallen god and got down on his knees while closing his eyes. The fire of destruction that eradicated depravity. Incarnation of calamities. The closest to the oldest one. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. Hearing the murmur in his ear again, Adrian formed the sphere of light again and entered the city of calamities. Seeing the small flame that pulsated slightly, Adrian extended his spirituality to it, forming the door of fire. Using the power of the city of calamities, the redhead released the yellowish smoke that wrapped his things and then made the burnt band float, his hidden blade, the 550-pounder and grievous characteristics, and he sends them through the door. Seeing how they appeared at the feet of his body, Adrian cut off the supply of spirituality, causing the door to close, and then left the city of calamities, but not before covering the magician's glove and the hangover time with yellowish smoke. Opening his eyes back in his body, Adrian saw how his things were in front of him, so grabbing the money, he placed it in his modified jacket pocket and then grabbed the burnt band and put it in his pocket. Finally, he grabbed his hidden blade but did not put it on yet, instead pressing a button made the blade extend, showing that it was covered in red. Sighing, Adrian grabbed a tissue and began to clean the blade, and when it was completely clean, he placed it back on his left forearm. Flexing his forearm and watching the blade extend, Adrian nodded, then stopped flexing, allowing the blade to slip back into hiding. Looking at his right hand, in which there was now a handkerchief slightly red with blood, Adrian approached the fireplace, and when he was about to throw it into it, he stopped. Sighing, the redhead returned to his room to sacrifice this handkerchief to himself, and after leaving it inside the city of calamities, Adrian left the Sephiroth to look at Grievous's characteristics on a table. After cleaning everything, leave no trace that the redhead has done a ritual here. Watching the time, Adrian sighed as he grabbed them and left his house. While Adrian was leaving his home in an unknown direction, Officer Watson Ulib was still working. The night before in Northborough St. Samuel Cathedral. In the church basement was the man with a large team looking at a large blackboard. On it was marked the location of Dutch Wilson's mansion where the demoness said attack occurred, and there was a large search area marked. There were also pasted on another board various photographs of different people. Some of them were the Nighthawks who were killed that night, and others were those of some nobles who attended. Among the photos there were also other quite remarkable ones, such as those of the Punishers who participated and those of Adrian and Grievous. And now Watson was putting up the drawing of the man Adrian had seen. Seeing the man's action, several of the members who were there looked at each other uncomfortable, and one raised his hand and said with an uncertain voice, "Captain, wouldn't that be the masked man who was in the red band case a few weeks ago?" "Yes, it is him, and now he has reappeared at the party fighting against the witches." Everyone there except Watson gasped slightly as one of them stood up with a frown. "But Captain, how is it possible that he appeared, since in none of the divinations was revealed his participation?" Faced with this question, Watson only marked Adrian's photo with a red brush while he was answering. "When I questioned Adrian Kenway, he revealed a lot of information regarding the case and also the appearance of this man." Adds by PubFuture. "It's very possible that the masked man intervened with the divination, that's why we can't see him anywhere. It's even possible that he used hypnosis on the people at the party so that they confuse his appearance with Grievous's." While saying that, Watson took the photo of Grievous off the board and threw it in the trash, completely ruling out his participation in the fight at the party. Before anyone could protest Watson's action, he raised his voice while hitting the drawing of the masked man. "I made various divinations and all of them failed due to external interventions. It is very likely that the fact that only Adrian Kenway managed to see and remember this man indicates that the masked man was very careful to cover his tracks, but only one managed to escape him." Quote, "Now Adrian Kenway will go into witness protection for the next 2 weeks. I want 2 people to be protecting him in those days, plus make sure you don't get caught by him. It's very likely he's a Beyander, but we don't have enough evidence, so be careful." Quote, "But Captain, then why are we cutting Grievous out of the equation?" At this, Watson coughed slightly while looking away, causing everyone in the room to have the same thought. He forgot again. "Thank you for reminding me. The elimination of Grievous in the participation of this case is due to the fact that all the divinations always pointed to him as if he were the one who controlled the fire, but when one puts the participation of the masked man into the equation, all this it gets complicated. As I said before, according to Adrian Kenway's testimony, the one who fought against the witches was this masked man, not Grievous. The divinations to verify this all failed, so we are dealing with a high mid-sequence Beyander who has the ability to anti-divine, modify people's visions and memories, is also able to move in the shadows and can also control fire." Every time he said an ability, Watson would hit the table with some force, causing the other Nighthawks to flip slightly. It is not necessary for me to say that he is someone very dangerous, so avoid confrontation at all costs if you run into him. Now everyone out, Alicia and Kevin will be in charge of protecting Adrian Kenway tomorrow. Ads by PubFuture. The Nighthawks nodded to the captain's words while Alicia and Kevin cursed under their breath about various things. Alicia about how this would ruin her beauty sleep and Kevin about him having a date tomorrow. When everyone left the room, Watson sat on the chair while rubbing his brow hard. There was another reason why Grievous was completely ruled out of the investigation, and this was the main reason, but it was not appropriate to tell his team members. Unlike the Punishers, Nighthawks and Witches who died there, Grievous was the one who never released his characteristics. One could say it was because the Witches took it, but this was ruled out by a simple question. So why didn't they take the others? When they did take one, why not all? Due to lack of time, it was a possibility, but another much greater one would be that someone did not allow them to do it. Watson got up from his chair and walked over to the drawing of the masked man and wrote something on it with a black pencil before leaving the room. He still had a lot of paperwork to do. Looking at the drawing of the masked man, one could see how a name was written under it. The Shadow Man. ... Returning to the present, Adrian, who had no idea that his lie had worked so spectacularly and brilliantly, was walking through the streets of Backland. Adrian right now had one hand in his pocket where he kept the burnt band as he walked. Since he left his house, he felt like he was being followed by someone, so this made him have to take another route. Following a hunter is a horrible idea, little mice, Adrian thought as he kept a calm expression, and while he moved between people, he took the opportunity to take a quick look to see who was following him. Seeing two people who were suspicious, Adrian slightly raised the corners of his mouth as he continued to walk calmly. Alicia could confidently say that this was not the way she intended to spend her Sunday afternoon, protecting a redhead from an attack by someone she knew for certain she couldn't defeat. Now I could be having tea in church, but no, I have to go on and take care of a dyed man who saw what he shouldn't have. The woman thought with some bitterness as she watched Adrian, who accidentally collided with a worker and was apologizing to the man as he continued on his way. At least it's a very good view, she thought with a slight blush as she bit her lower lip as she stared at the man's face. Maybe it's not a bad idea to check if it's really dyed hair. With a mischievous glow, the woman watched as her target kept walking on the crowded street. It was certainly an advantage that the man's hair is so exotic, otherwise it is very likely that they have lost sight of him long ago. Turning her gaze slightly to the other side of the street, Alicia watched as a man who was reading the newspaper gave her a light nod. Seeing how Alicia was watching the target, Kevin couldn't help but shake his head as he continued to browse the newspaper but always kept his gaze on the redhead. It was lucky that his date understood that something had come up at work and they were able to move the date to Thursday afternoon. Sighing with relief, Kevin turned to look at Alicia only to see how she was pale and moving quickly among the people. Alarmed by his teammates' reaction, he also turned to see where she was looking, only to discover that the redhead had disappeared. I only stopped looking for 10 seconds, how is it possible that he vanished so quickly? Clutching the newspaper he was reading, he followed behind Alicia as they went to the last place they had seen Adrian. As he approached Alicia, he could see how she entered an alley on the side of the path. Quickening his pace, he also entered to see how Alicia was a little deep in the alley in front of a large wall. Ads by PubFuture. A dead end, Kevin muttered as he slowly approached Alicia while taking out a revolver from his belt that was hidden by his vest. Standing next to Alicia and looking around, he confirmed once again that there was no way out. He put the revolver back away while raising a hand to his head. Alicia also raised a hand to her forehead as she continued to stare at the wall. They both turned to look at the other at the same time and said the same thing. The captain is going to kill us. While they were saying that, an idea flashed in Kevin's head as he raised his voice a little towards Alicia, who looked back at the alley wall. Alice, can't you track him down with your monster abilities? Alicia shot him a sharp look as she punched him in the shoulder. You don't think I already tried? I can't feel anything. Rubbing his arm where he had been hit, Kevin could only apologize in a pained voice as he lowered his head. Sorry, it's just that how is it possible that we lose him like this? While all this was happening in the alley on the roof of the building next to it, a redhead was listening to all this with a raised eyebrow and a black burnt band on his left arm. So Nighthawks, also the Beyonders of the Path of Destiny won't lose control if they look directly at me, and they can't track me either. That's good to know, although I don't know how it would be with those of a higher sequence. Ads by PubFuture. A small white snake that was eating ice cream from a container bigger than itself formed in the redhead's mind, causing an amused smile to form on his face while taking off the black band. Shaking his head, Adrian removed that image from his head and then began to move between the buildings, taking big jumps. After repeating this for about 15 minutes and moving well away from where the Nighthawks were, Adrian stopped at a random building while using the windows to go down an alley. Leaving the alley, Adrian began to head towards Backland Bridge so that he could visit a particular clown. The characteristic should have had enough time to breathe by now, so it should be safe. Adrian thought as he got into a public carriage headed for Backland Bridge. When the redhead sat down, he didn't notice how a mother was with her son on the other side of the street. And this boy stood still before turning to look at the redhead's carriage that was slowly moving away. "Will, what flavor of ice cream would you like?" At this, Will stopped looking at the carriage to look at his mother with a big smile. "Mint please, mommy." With a smile, the woman turned to the ice cream man to place her order while Will turned back to look at the carriage. Curious was what he thought as his eyes turned blacker and an eyebrow rose. Adrian right now was with his eyes closed while he touched with his hand the container where Grievous's characteristics were kept. "This will be the last favor I will ask of you, Mr. Grievous, so hold on a little longer." While thinking that, Adrian turned to look out the carriage window at the Backland sky. Standing in front of Nathan and Sasha's house, Adrian knocked on the door as he waited for the clown to answer. Looking around while waiting, Adrian only narrowed his eyes slightly. According to Nathan, the danger that was stalking him would appear in the first week of July, but he did not know what exact day. Today is the 1st of July, so on one of these days it is very likely that something will happen. Adrian just crossed his arms as he leaned against the wall. This was simply to have his right hand on his revolver in case something happened. Watching the door open next to him and Nathan looking at him, Adrian nodded as he stepped away from the wall. "Are you going to let me in or what?" Nathan just kept his face blank as he stepped to the side, allowing Adrian to enter. Sitting in the living room, Adrian was sitting across from Nathan, who had a revolver in hand as he looked around. "Any new revelation about your little stalker?" Nathan had to use his clown skills to keep the corners of his mouth from twitching as he responded to the redhead. "The only thing I have obtained is that it will be between Monday and Friday, but the probability that it will be today is not low, boss." Nodding at this, Adrian stopped playing games and took out the container with Grievous's features and placed it on the table. "I want you to use divination in this to know the pyromaniac formula." Looking at the container on the table, Nathan raised an eyebrow, and after doing a quick divination with a coin to see if it was safe to touch it, seeing the result, Nathan grabbed the container and opened it. Seeing a glowing red stone that had a slight warmth to it, he opened his eyes slightly, then looked at Adrian. "These are the characteristics of a pyromaniac, and it should be possible to use them to know the formula of this one." Ads by PubFuture. Nathan only showed an even more confused expression, but he soon used his clown skills to control his expression. So while controlling his expression, Nathan raised an eyebrow and asked with some doubt, "Boss, what is the characteristics?" Adrian rested his cheek on his right palm as he watched Nathan and spoke calmly. "When a Beyander dies, due to the Beyander characteristics indestructibility law, the extraordinary material originally used by that Beyander will precipitate, leaving a Beyander characteristics with its mental imprint regardless of its sequence level. The Beyander characteristic is equivalent to a potion lacking the complementary ingredients and encompasses all potions a Beyander has taken." At Adrian's words, Nathan's skin slowly turned pale. "Boss, what is the law of indestructibility of the Beyander characteristics?" Adrian, still with his calm expression, looked into Nathan's blue eyes as he answered. "There are a total of 3 laws that will always be followed no matter what. First, the law of Beyander characteristics indestructibility. The characteristics of a Beyander is never destroyed or reduced. It's only passed from one carrier to the next. Second, the law of similar sequence Beyander characteristics conservation. There are a fixed amount of Beyander characteristics in every pathway group. Third, the law of Beyander characteristics convergence. High sequence items of the same pathway or group intermittently and unconsciously draw low and mid-sequence Beyonders to them." Looking at Nathan's pale expression, Adrian only showed a slight smile as he answered the question that Nathan couldn't bring himself to ask. If you were wondering, then yes, you could say that it is a form of cannibalism to use the characteristics of dead beyonders as ingredients. Staring into Nathan's eyes, Adrian sharpened his smile as his tone turned a little darker. That will be your destiny and mine if we are not careful. We will become ingredients for someone else's promotion. Ads by PubFuture. Nathan could barely control his expression as his skin turned paler and he just grabbed the container with the red stone and stood up. I'm going to divine your formula, boss. I'll be back in a moment. Adrian let out a small laugh seeing how Nathan had decided to run away for now so as not to deal with him. This information will help you in the future, Nathan, don't worry, Adrian thought as he settled down and waited for Nathan to finish. Nathan was now in his room with the curtains drawn, allowing his room to go dark. Grabbing a piece of paper, he wrote on it pyromaniac formula and then placed it on the container with the characteristic to then repeat the question 7 times, and then enter a state of cogitation. In that state Nathan managed to see a gray fog, and after a while he saw a middle-aged man in front of an old man with a thick white beard and square glasses who had a paper in his hand and handed it to him. Here's the formula, I'll be accompanying you in your promotion in case something happens grievous. The one called Grievous nodded to this and looked at the paper, and Nathan, who was looking at all this, could also see it. Leaving the state, Nathan wrote the formula on a piece of paper and then left his room and returned to Adrian. Nathan saw how Adrian seemed to have a blade in his left hand and he was looking at it with a somewhat deep look. Then the redhead turned to look at him before giving a smile as the blade hid inside his left sleeve. Nathan pretended not to see anything and extended the paper towards the redhead. Here is your formula, boss. Good job, Nathan. The redhead got up from his seat and took something out of his pocket and then showed it to Nathan. Seeing the 10 pounds, the blue-eyed raised an eyebrow at Adrian, who, seeing this, let out a light laugh. This is for your services today. After all, I am very satisfied. Don't say it in that weird way. Nathan yelled in his mind, but using the clown ability he kept his expression as he grabbed the money. Adrian reached out his left hand and took the paper with the formula to read it. Pyromaniac formula. Main ingredients. Heart of a fire lion. Uvula of a magma iguana. Supplementary ingredients. Asterisk 80 milliliters of blood of a fire lion. Asterisk 10 drops of sun essential oil. Asterisk 5 grams of solidified lava. Looking at the formula, Adrian just sighed as he put the paper in a pocket and looked into Nathan's eyes. It shouldn't take long for me to advance, so I hope you're ready to fight. Remember to teach Sasha what I taught you today. Nathan just nodded, and before he could say anything the redhead continued talking. Could I use your bathroom, by the way? Nathan raised an eyebrow as he nodded and showed the redhead where it was. Inside the bathroom, Adrian locked the door and then took out of his modified jacket some red candles and red poppies along with a piece of paper with a symbol drawn on it. Placing the red candles along with the red poppies and the symbol in place, Adrian lit the candles and then recited the incantation in ancient Hermes. Hearing the murmur in his ear, Adrian entered the city of calamities. Again using his spirituality on the small pulsing flame, he opened the fire door, then cleared the yellow smoke and sent hangover time towards the door. Having done all this, the redhead left the city. He blew out the candles and put away all his things, and after opening the window and flushing the toilet, he came out of the bathroom. Saying goodbye to Nathan, who was looking at him strangely, Adrian took a public carriage and went to the house of a certain detective. Ads by PubFuture. It didn't take long for Adrian to get to the detective's house, and after knocking on the door and having the servant answer it, the servant showed surprise as he looked at Adrian, who only showed a weak smile as he spoke. Is Isengar at home? I'd like to talk to him. The man only showed a somewhat uncomfortable expression as he told him to wait a moment and then close the door. Waiting outside, Adrian looked at the backlit sky as he waited and tried to find figures in the clouds. After 10 minutes the servant opened the door again with a blank expression. Master Isengar is waiting for you in the study room. Thanks. Thanking the man, Adrian entered the house and went to the place where Isengar was. Knocking on the door and listening to the pass of the man, Adrian entered. Looking at Isengar, he could see how he had light dark circles under his eyes and his hair was slightly disheveled while his look was hurt. Sorry to bother you, teacher. Seeing the state of the detective, Adrian tried to apologize, but the older man raised his hand and interrupted him. Don't worry, Adrian, a police contact of mine told me what happened. It's nice to see you well. After saying that, Isengar pointed to Adrian to sit down and he followed the man's order to sit next to him. What brings you to my house, Adrian? I thought you would still be recovering from what happened. Excuse me again, teacher, but I think it is correct for me to give you this. When Adrian said that, he took out the container and the familiar pocket watch and placed them on the table next to Isengar. The detective, when he saw the pocket watch, could only press his lips a little and then grab the container and release the wall of spirituality. Opening the container and seeing the red stone, Isengar just closed his eyes as he sighed heavily before closing the container again. Ads by PubFuture. Turning to face Adrian, Isengar spoke while letting out a small laugh. You always knew what these things were, right, Adrian? In this regard, Adrian didn't mind continuing to pretend, so he nodded. I always knew that they were the characteristics beyond our teacher. Isengar continued to laugh as he raised a hand to his forehead and wiped a tear from his eye. That shameless old man won the bet in the end. At Isengar's words, Adrian raised an eyebrow in doubt, but Isengar was quick to respond. When you told me you knew about the acting method and I told Grievous about it, he bet me £70 that you also knew about Beander characteristics, since according to him it was highly suspicious that you didn't connect the dots up to that point. When Adrian heard this, he also laughed as he lowered his head to laugh, and Isengar joined him in that. Mr. Grievous certainly had a sharp eye, huh? You are absolutely right, my student. As he said that, Isengar handed him the container and the pocket watch again, to which Adrian showed a surprised expression. Why are you giving them back to me? Isengar only had a soft smile as he took out his pipe and calmly lit it. I'm sure you went through a lot of trouble to be able to get hold of them without the church officials noticing, and I'm sure Grievous would have preferred that you be the one inheriting his characteristics than having them inherited by someone else. Besides, I'm sure hangover time will be more useful to you than to me. Quote. Adrian just grabbed the items again as he brought them to his chest and hugged them tight. Thank you. It was the weak voice of Adrian who released a slight sob. Isengar did not care about this as tears also fell from his eyes. This is how teacher and student cried over the departure of a friend. They stayed like that for a while, and the first to recover his composure was Isengar, who raised his fist to his mouth and coughed slightly as he inhaled from his pipe. Hearing the cough, Adrian also recovered and felt that his chest no longer felt as tight as before. The weight was still there, but now he could breathe easier and not feel like he was suffocating. Seeing that his student was watching him, Isengar nodded slightly before speaking. You know you can use Grievous's characteristics to advance when you manage to fully digest the provocator potion. As Isengar spoke, he saw how Adrian put a hand to his head and began to scratch himself with an expression of embarrassment. This made him show an expression of alarm. Adrian, don't tell me that you... Isengar spoke in an incredulous voice as his pipe fell out of his mouth. The redhead simply nodded as he spoke with a somewhat awkward voice. The potion was fully digested at the party, and I was planning to collect the ingredients after I handed over Grievous's characteristics to you. This is ridiculous, was all the detective said as he put a hand to his forehead, and his expression was one of disbelief. Looking at the redhead while still having his hand on his forehead, Isengar asked what he was missing. I need 80 milliliters of blood of a fire lion, 10 drops of sun essential oil, and 5 grams of solidified lava. Hearing the materials the redhead needed, Isengar could only nod weakly as he heaved a heavy sigh. I have the blood of the fire lion and the solidified lava, but not that oil. You should be able to buy it on the black market under the Bravehearts bar. Ads by PubFuture. Nodding at Isengar's words, Adrian added to his schedule to bother the old man today when he visits Bravehearts bar. So how much would it be for blood and lava? Picking up his pipe and cleaning it with his blue handkerchief, the detective replied in a flat voice. Fire lion's blood is an excellent material for most medicinal potions and also quite annoying to get, so it would be £250 for it. Solidified lava is a good ingredient for special bullets, but it's quite easy to get if you know where to search, so it would be £60. When he heard the price, Adrian just nodded. £310 for the complementary ingredients of a sequence 7 potion was already normal, and he could already imagine the price of higher sequence ingredients. Pulling out his wallet and in front of the eyes of the detective, Adrian counted out £310 and handed it to Isengar, who had a quivering eyebrow. I'll bring you the ingredients in a moment, wait here. It didn't take long for Isengard to go to his hidden storeroom and bring back 2 medium containers sealed with a wall of spirituality and place them in front of Adrian, who released the seal of one of them to see that inside there was a vial of blood that was emanating a high temperature and felt the desire to drink it. Adrian closed the container again and reformed the wall of spirituality before the eyes of Isengard. Checking the other one, Adrian saw how there was a black bag, and opening it, Adrian saw inside these some black stones that have weird form. Resealing the container and putting the 2 inside his jacket, Adrian thanked Isengard, who just nodded with a small smile. Also keeping the hangover time as well as the container with the characteristics of Grievous, Adrian gave a small bow and said goodbye to Isengard, who stayed in his living room smoking. Being in another public carriage, an idea flashed in the head of Adrian, who had a short stop at a store to get back on the public carriage with a cloth bag in hand. Now he continued his way towards Braveheart's bar while a smirk formed on his face. Standing in front of the old man, who had a hand on his forehead and gave him a tired look, he asked him for £1 and then told him to follow him. Adrian followed the old man to the end of the bar that was guarded by 2 muscular men who had weapons on their belts. Ads by PubFuture. Walking through the door, Adrian could see the closest thing to the street market of his previous life. It seemed that the basement of the bar was a very large warehouse in which it looked like a small market with stalls on the sides, vendors who talked loudly trying to promote their products, and shops that sold amulets. Adrian didn't give any importance to the amulet shops since he well remembered what Klein said about them. And he didn't have the knowledge or inspiration from it to know which was real and which was a scam. So the only thing he sat down in was looking for the oil he needed, and after half an hour asking between the stalls and one or the other trying to rip him off, Adrian arrived at a stall whose roof was a white cloth. On the table of this booth Adrian saw a large bottle with bright yellow liquid like the sun, and he felt a slight attraction to it. Bingo! With a smile Adrian approached the stall, and seeing how someone approached the vendor, he got up with a business smile. "What would you like to buy at Good Jimmy's stall, sir? What is the yellow liquid in that bottle?" the redhead asked as he pointed to the bottle from before. "That would be a bottle of Sun Essential Oil exported directly from Intis, sir," said the seller, looking at the bottle that the man was pointing at with pride. Adrian with bright eyes spoke. "How much would it be for 10 milliliters? £90, sir." Adrian's expression turned sour and the vendor just crossed his arms as he whispered indignantly. "You must know that getting this oil was a pain in the ass. You know how Intis believers are, so if you don't like the price, why don't you go to hell?" Adrian just grunted as he took out the money and paid the man, who now had a bright smile and pulled out a scale from under the table along with a vial. "Klein would have convulsions if he knew how much I spent for oil," Adrian thought as he watched intently as the vendor poured the oil into the vial. Adrian was now again standing in front of the old man, and the much-loved Marich was on one side of the room playing cards, not interested in what the others were chatting. "That would be all, old man, thank you very much. I would also like to speak with Mr. Marich alone." Marich put down his cards and looked at the redhead with a raised eyebrow, while the old man just looked at the 2 of them before nodding and leaving the room. When they were alone Adrian shot Marich a smile before pulling out a silver knife and putting up a wall of spirituality. Seeing the redhead's actions, Marich became serious and dropped the cards while looking directly at the redhead. "What do you want to talk about?" Adrian took a medium pot from his cloth bag and placed it on one of the pool tables. "In fact, I didn't want to talk about anything, I just wanted you to watch my back for a few minutes." Marich's brown eyes gleamed with maliciousness and he began to slowly get up from his chair along with his zombies. But before he could say or do anything, Marich watched as Adrian pulled out a spiritually sealed container, and undoing the seal he pulled out a red vial. Opening it, he poured the liquid into the pot. Being that Marich had passed for werewolf, his senses had sharpened to the extreme, and being a greater sequence now those senses sharpened even more. That's why he was sure that that red liquid was the blood of some animal. "He's not going to think about advancing here, is he?" The doubt in Marich's mind was answered when he saw how the redhead took out another container, and releasing the seal, he took out a bag and threw some black stones into the pot. After that he saw how he took out a vial with a golden yellow liquid and poured it into the pot. Ads by PubFuture. "I decided to advance here because I am being watched by the Nighthawks, and advancing in my house is very dangerous." Adrian spoke in a cheerful voice as he watched the ingredients in the pot interact and reached back into his jacket. "Wait, what did you say?" Marich responded instinctively, but Adrian completely ignored the question. Before Marich could process Adrian's words, he took out one last container, and undoing the seal he took out a red stone from it, and after looking at it for a few seconds he threw it into the mixture in the pot. Don't worry, I made sure I lost them before coming here so you won't have to deal with the officers. Adrian added calmly, as if he was talking about the weather and not how he had lost the Nighthawks. Quote. Marich just had a blank face and could only watch as the redhead finished making his potion, and he poured it into a glass of wine that was there. The potion was bright orange in color and gave off strong heat. Adrian closed his eyes for a few seconds to meditate and calm his emotional state. Knowing that it was already too late, Marich could only sit back in his chair and command his zombies to do the same, but they all kept their gazes on the redhead who had opened his eyes. Looking into Marich's malicious brown eyes, Adrian just raised the glass with the potion as if he were raising a toast. Cheers, Mr. Marich. Saying this, Adrian raised the glass to his lips and began to drink the potion in large gulps. Adrian could feel the potion going down his throat, he could feel it burning his throat, and his skin and hair began to smoke. Closing his eyes, Adrian entered a meditative state to control the effect of the potion on his body. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian could feel how his spirituality shot up and multiplied several times what he had. He could also feel how he was getting hotter, representing his new ability with fire. After a few minutes, the smoke coming out of Adrian's skin stopped and only the excess of spirituality remained. The redhead continued meditating to control this, and after 10 minutes he opened his red eyes that now seemed slightly brighter. Congratulations. Turning his gaze to Marich, Adrian gave him a slight smile as he held out his hand, and a beautiful orange flame formed in it. This orange flame took on the shape similar to that of a raven that spread its wings and began to fly around the room. Watching how the fire raven flew across the room and how he could control it, a smile formed on Adrian's face. Controlling the fire raven, Adrian made it do a quick zigzag turn before shooting towards him, and he just held out his left hand and snapped his fingers, making the raven disappear. Thank you for taking care of me, Mr. Marich, was what Adrian said before forming a fire hat in his right hand and a cane in his left hand and giving a deep bow to Marich, whose eyebrow trembled just like his hand. You finished. Adrian gave him another big smile before pulling about 10 pounds from his pocket, walking over to where Marich was sitting and placing the money on the table in front of him. Nice doing business with you, as he said that he placed the fire hat on his chest and bowed again to Marich, whose hands were shaking. Seeing this, Adrian kept his smile, the fire hat and the cane disappeared, and the redhead went to the door of the room. When he opened it, the wall of spirituality fell apart and the redhead turned and winked at Marich before leaving the room. Now alone, Marich let out a strong growl as he closed his eyes and meditated, and his hands that were still shaking slowly stopped shaking. The reflection of a blonde, blue-eyed woman appeared in the window, and she looked at Marich, who was still meditating. On the roof of a house you could see a bored man and a woman with dark circles under her eyes and a tired expression. They had a metal bottle next to them and 2 half-full cups. You could smell the coffee if you got close enough. Is the bastard still sleeping? The woman asked the man as she grabbed a cup with her gloved hands. Asleep as a log, he replied while looking through a pair of binoculars towards the window of a particular house. Through this window was a room with a medium bed, a wardrobe at the end and a mirror. Lying on the bed and fast asleep was a red-haired man. Kevin lowered the binoculars somewhat bitterly while grabbing a cup of coffee that his partner had passed him. Taking a sip of this beloved drink, he didn't need this to stay awake, unlike his teammate. After all, he was a sleepless. The deeper the night, the stronger he would become, so he was at 100% strength. His partner, on the other hand. Looking at the woman next to him, Kevin could only shake his head. Alicia looked like she was going to fall asleep on the spot. Kevin didn't blame her, after all this was her first time doing night duty. In addition to the fact that Alicia was a monster and this path did not help much in the current work, this was the punishment that Captain Watson had imposed on them when they went to tell him how they had lost their target and could only find him when he was already at home. Watching Alicia almost fall asleep again, Kevin shook his head and gently shook the shoulder of the woman, who looked at him with a sleepy look. You can sleep now, I'll take care of the rest of the night. If something happens, I'll wake you up. Ads by PubFuture. Alicia didn't even answer, she just nodded weakly with her head, and grabbing her jacket, she folded it and lay her head on top of it. Not even 20 seconds had passed and she had already fallen asleep. Kevin just sighed at this, and taking another sip of his coffee he kept looking at the room where Adrian was asleep. But there was a detail that neither Kevin nor Alicia could have discovered, and that was that the redhead was wide awake, the only thing that would be not in his body. In a large city covered in yellowish smoke and whose inhabitants were fire soldiers who patrolled 24/7, on the outskirts of this city there was a fireworks display. Forming other fire ravens, Adrian controlled them and let them fly around him. Seeing how the ravens circled 3 times, Adrian controlled them and made them shoot up into the sky and explode. Nodding to this, Adrian extended his right arm and slightly opening his palm he formed a spear of fire. Aiming anywhere, Adrian threw the spear hard and watched as it traveled through the air until it hit the ground hard, causing a small explosion. Looking at his right hand that was unaffected by directly touching fire, he sighed softly and then created a fireball slightly larger than a tennis ball. Destroying the fireball, Adrian concentrated slightly before a wall of fire appeared in front of him. Looking at this wall, it seemed about 2 meters and quite thick, but Adrian quickly made it disappear. It cost a lot of spirituality, although it makes sense after all. This is my shield. He spoke as he sat on the yellowish ground and crossed his legs and arms. Ads by PubFuture. Pyromancer's abilities are undoubtedly destructive and have a lot of juice to drink. The ability to produce and control fire at will means that each pyromancer can be able to create their own special abilities, not just the ones that come from the factory. Rising from his spot, Adrian placed his right foot behind and his left foot in front as he extended his left arm with his open palm. Concentrating, Adrian formed an bow of fire, and then extending the bowstring, an arrow of fire formed and glowed with power. Aiming, Adrian released the string and the arrow shot out with great speed, going much further and faster than the spear, but upon impact it did not do even half the damage of the spear. At long distance targets this movement will be more useful than the spear. The consumption is somewhat low, so respecting simplicity it will be called fire arrow. The bow of fire disappeared from Adrian's hand, who this time extended his right hand forward, palm open. A ball of fire formed in the palm of the redhead, who began to imbue more spirituality to the ball that, instead of getting bigger as it should, Adrian was controlling it to make it smaller and smaller. Adrian's arm was shaking with the effort, as was the rest of his body. He could barely hold the ball that was now as small as a marble and white in color. This white marble began to emit a loud hum that made his ears ache. Not being able to take it anymore, Adrian released the attack, and the white marble released a white laser of energy that, after reaching 20 meters, became a torrent of fire. As the laser couldn't maintain itself, that travel another 10 meters. Dropping to one knee, Adrian could only let out huge sigh as he took in deep breaths. By installing more spirituality in the fireball, it not only made it more powerful, but by compressing it, it went from fire to a plasma state that, when released, would be a deadly laser beam. The only problem is that it takes him 20 seconds of extreme concentration to form the attack, and feeling his spirituality tank, he could only do one in a fight, and if he missed he would be almost out of strength to keep fighting. Hearing ravings in his ear, Adrian could only end practice early and leave the city, but he didn't do so before naming this deadly attack. Plasma beam. On a busy street, Nathan and Sasha, who were on the alert trying to get through a busy street while trying to get somewhere. Nathan's spirituality began to warn him of something, but he couldn't find the source of this danger no matter how much he looked around. Something's wrong, Nathan thought, somewhat alarmed as he moved faster among the people, being closely followed by Sasha. Running into a man that held onto the collar of Nathan's shirt and started yelling at him while Sasha tried to calm the man down. But Nathan wasn't looking at the man who was holding him or Sasha, but at another group behind them who were getting closer and closer. 2 faceless people were calmly advancing towards him, and Nathan's blood ran cold and he tried to escape the man's grasp, but he wouldn't let go. "Let me go, bastard." Giving a hard blow to the man's face, Nathan's fist sank into the man's face as if he had hit a puddle of water. Suddenly all the people around him turned to look at him, and they were faceless. These things with human skin extended their arms and grabbed Nathan, who struggled with all his might but could not escape. And Sasha tried to fight using her sword, but she was also suppressed with no problem. One of the original faceless figures stood in front of him and took out a revolver while pointing it at his face. Before this thing could pull the trigger, a great tide of fire hit all the faceless things, freeing him and Sasha. Now standing in front of them was a tall red-haired man who was holding a spear made of fire while aiming it at 2 faceless men. Now he could see better this men, one was still faceless and the other had a head that was a sun. The next thing Nathan could see was how a newspaper slid down the street and collided with his hand. Looking at the date on it, he could see how it read July 5, 1349. Ads by PubFuture. This was the last thing he saw before the place he was in broke into pieces like glass. Waking up in his bed very agitated, Nathan grabbed a revolver that was hidden under his pillow and pointed it around him, seeing that Nathan was in his room under the revolver. Ah, 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 ah. Closing his eyes, Nathan meditated to calm his state. After a few minutes, now more calm, he opened his eyes and hid the revolver under his pillow again. That was a revelation in a seer's dream. Turning to look at his window and looking at the red moon in the dark sky at night, Nathan could only sigh in defeat. What I feared so much will happen on Thursday while I'm with Sasha. Remembering how that man without a face had put the revolver in his face and how he could see the dark barrel of the gun, a chill passed through his body. According to the revelation, these enemies are capable of easily suppressing us and have some helpers, but it seems that they did not expect the intervention of someone unknown. Remembering that tide of fire that pushed back the faceless man and the red-haired man's back, a calm also covered his body. Thanks, boss, was what Nathan thought as he stopped looking at the window and left his room in the direction of Sasha's to tell her what he had just dreamed. On Monday morning, Adrian woke up and after bathing he left the house again in the direction of Braveheart's bar. Ads by PubFuture. Seeing the redhead enter, the bartender just shook his head and seeing that the man stood in front of him just spoke. The old man is where always. I didn't come here for him this time, I just want to drink a little. Shaking her head, Adrian just sat up. Half and half. On the way. Hearing the order, the bartender turned around and began to prepare it while Adrian waited, still feeling how he was being watched. If I continue to be watched, I won't be able to help Nathan with his problem. I have to find a way to make them leave me alone at least for the rest of this week. Grabbing the glass with the drink, Adrian began to drink while trying to think of some way to lose these nighthawks. Should I leave extra pillows on my bed overnight that resemble me and leave home? Laughing at this silly idea, Adrian continued to drink calmly until an idea flashed in his head. Wait. The fire soldiers in the City of Calamities, if I can use them temperamentally to act like me during those days, then I should be able to help Nathan. The witches are not going to dare to make another big move so fast after what they did at the party, so I should be safe for now. With a goal in mind, Adrian kept drinking and no one bothered him in all that time. Finishing his drink, Adrian left the bar and returned home, but not before passing through the market. Picking up a tomato and touching it to make sure it's good, Adrian nodded and put it back in his bag. Paying for the tomatoes that he took, he began to look for some potatoes, and as he walked he collided with a boy who turned to apologize as he continued running, and Adrian lost sight of him among the people. Adrian just kept his hand where his wallet was, making sure it was still there, and shook his head at the boy with a small smile. He never noticed how there was a paper origami inside his bag next to the tomatoes. Placing the bag of everything he bought in the market, Adrian went to his room and opened his closet and took out some towels while he discreetly placed the red candles and red poppies between the towel and went to the bathroom. Closing the bathroom door, Adrian opened the towel and took out the candles and red poppies and placing them in position, but he didn't light them. Instead, he entered the City of Calamities first. Looking at the city that was so similar to his hometown, Adrian turned to look at a fire soldier and approached him. Standing in front of the fire soldier, who was so taller than him that he had to lower his head to look at him. This one won't work. Looking at the 3-head height difference, Adrian said quietly. I don't know if you understand me, but I need one of you to act like me outside for 7 days. The fire soldier looked at him for a few seconds and then gave a military salute. Quote? With a raised eyebrow, Adrian observed this but then heard something coming towards him quickly. Turning around, he saw another fire soldier approaching them. This fire soldier stood in front of Adrian and was the same height as him. You're the same height as me, but I don't know how you're going to act like me if you're, well, fire. The soldier just nodded and extended his left arm towards Adrian but did not touch him. Taken somewhat by surprise, Adrian glanced at the outstretched arm, then looked at the soldier's fiery head. Ads by PubFuture. Well, here goes nothing. Said that Adrian held the fire soldier's arm. It didn't take long to feel how his spirituality was absorbed with a good speed, but he didn't let go of the soldier's arm. That's because he could see how the soldier was slowly transforming into a human being. First it was the body that became that of a person, followed by the hair, eyes, lips, etc. Until standing in front of the redhead there was an exact copy of him, the only difference being that his eyes were a reddish-orange color unlike Adrian's which were a brilliant scarlet red. But this didn't matter to the redhead because this was perfect, just what he needed. Perfect, now I just have to get you out of here. When he finished saying that, Adrian watched as his copy nodded and then used his other arm to grab Adrian's arm. Then this copy slowly turned into a yellowish powder and began to get into Adrian's arm, who was wide-eyed in shock. The copy continued like this until it completely disappeared and Adrian turned to look at the first soldier still with a shocked look. The soldier just pointed to his forearm and Adrian pulled back his shirt and could see how there was a small tattoo there in the shape of a little soldier with a spear in hand. This is not what I thought was going to happen, Adrian said quietly as he rubbed at the tattoo. Leaving the city, Adrian returned to his body and checking his arm confirmed that the tattoo was there. Investing some spirituality in the tattoo, Adrian felt like 1/6 of his spirituality was taken and the tattoo glowed in golden dust so that facing Adrian would appear a copy of it. Adrian was silent, somewhat uncomfortable because he was sitting on the toilet while his copy was standing in the shower and there were candles and flowers on the floor giving a somewhat uncomfortable environment. Ads by PubFuture. Ignoring that, Adrian reached out and touched his copy's arm. Apart from the fact that her body was hotter than him, there was no abnormality. Nodding, Adrian stood in front of his copy, who gave a waiting military salute. Very well, your job is to act like me during this week, avoid getting in trouble and do not do anything strange, understand? Yes, sir. His copy spoke in a voice similar to his, but it was a strange tone, but it was acceptable. Will the spirituality you have now be able to sustain you for that long? Sir, spirituality is enough. I can also get something back if I sleep while not fighting. I could support myself for up to 2 weeks, sir. Is there a maximum distance you have to be from me? No, sir. I am directly connected to the base, so you have to enter the base every 12 hours for me to maintain my position, sir. Am I your superior? Ignoring how the soldier acted, Adrian just shook his head as he collected the candles and flowers and placed them in a corner of the bathroom. After that, he placed the burnt band on his left arm. Then I'll leave the rest to you. See you on Sunday. Come out of the bathroom after another 3 minutes. When he said that, the shadows wrapped around him and he left the place to then do another 2 shadow leaps, getting far enough away from his house so that the Nighthawks wouldn't see him. The soldier disguised as Adrian waited for 3 minutes and then opened the bathroom door and began to act like Adrian, and the first thing he did was put away everything that the original had bought. Holding the origami that resembled a bird in his hands, the soldier looked at it for a moment before placing it aside. After doing that, the soldier went to the redhead's room to lie down on his bed and sleep, all this under the gaze of Alicia, who observed everything through binoculars. This hot asshole, Nathan, if he was being honest, was somewhat uncomfortable but also relieved. In front of him, sitting cross-legged on a chair and resting his head on the palm of his hand, was a familiar red-eyed man. Adrian had arrived a few moments ago and had said that he would stay with him during this week to avoid any accident. Right now he finished telling him what he had dreamed of the night before and he listened to everything with narrowed eyes. When Nathan finished, he looked at Adrian, who had his eyes closed. What do you think may be the pathways of our new friends? Taken somewhat by surprise, Nathan couldn't help but exclaim slightly. That was not the reaction I was expecting, boss. Does it not matter to you that we will be attacked on Thursday, or is it that you are confident that we will be fine? While thinking that, Nathan also tried to think about the dream he saw, and what came to mind was the face of one of the men. It is very likely that the one with the head of the sun is from the path of the bard, but I don't know which path is the faceless one. Hee. Adrian gave a small laugh that made the corners of Nathan's lips want to quiver, but he used the clown ability and waited for Adrian to speak. It is very likely that the faceless you are saying is a meander of the path of the seer. After all, the sequence 6 of this path is called faceless. What? Nathan only looked at his boss in surprise, who only had a side smile on his face as he watched him. The sequence 7 of the seer pathway is called magician. They gain 9 spells that can be cast at high speeds, without needing to chant or inject spirituality. Ads by PubFuture. 1_ damage transfer. As long as magicians are not dead and can still move their hand, they can transfer vital wound to an unimportant areas like arms, turning fatal wounds into minor injuries, but they can't transfer the damage to other people or items. Each wound can only be transferred once. They can also transfer the wounds of others. 2_flaming jump. Magicians could phase through a fire spark that they had left behind and any flame that existed within 30 meters. They are immune to ordinary flames at the moment they uses this power. 3_air bullet. They can produce air projectiles with power and speed comparable to that of the bullets fired from a custom revolver just by snapping their fingers or mimicking sounds. 4_paper figurine substitute. They can transform a paper figurine into themselves and swap places with the figurine. That was how Adrian spent his time explaining to Nathan the magician's abilities and what their enemy would be able to do with them. Nathan had to sit down so he could pay better attention to Adrian. These magician abilities would be ones he had a chance to get, that would be if he managed to move forward safely. But that is a dream that is still very far away, Nathan thought with some bitterness knowing that such good skills were so far away from him. Ignorant of Nathan's depressed thoughts, Adrian turned his head and looked out the window to see the late afternoon coming on. Sasha should be back soon, right? Oh yes, she should be here in 20 minutes, boss, replied the clown as he took out a simple pocket watch from his pocket and looked at the time. Nodding to the man's words, Adrian just grabbed a newspaper that was on the side and began to read it. Terrorist attack in a party claims 40 lives. As Nathan was watching Adrian grab and read the newspaper, he was surprised to see how the redhead crumpled the newspaper into a ball. Ads by PubFuture. Boss. Suddenly he saw how the ball caught fire and quickly turned to ash while still being in the redhead hands, who wasn't bothered by it. With his mouth hanging slightly, the clown looked at Adrian, who only looked at the ashes in his hands before turning to look at him with a sweet smile. Sorry Nathan, it's just that I didn't like the advertising it showed. Sure boss. Nathan replied as he looked away, pretending that nothing had happened. Thus they passed the time in silence while they waited for Sasha to return from his work at the church. After the 20 minutes Nathan had said, a tall woman dressed in a brown robe walked through the door, who was surprised to see Adrian inside her house. Hi boss. The redhead greeted him as he turned to look at the ceiling. Turning his head, the blonde looked at the blue-eyed man, demanding an explanation. He. Giggling, Nathan had to use the clown ability to keep from looking anywhere but Sasha's eyes. Chuckling slightly, Adrian watched his companion's interaction with amusement. Nathan ignored his boss's laugh and began to explain the situation to Sasha, who, after hearing everything, turned to look at Adrian with a raised eyebrow. Boss, you won't be here because you're homeless, right? Don't worry Sasha, if I had to stay anywhere else it wouldn't be here. We do what we can. Tomato head, Sasha thought with a pulsing vein while Nathan just shook his head. Returning to the city covered in yellowish mist, the soldiers continued to patrol. And on the outskirts of the city, explosions sounded. In the middle of a large empty space, Adrian stood there and there was a fiery whip in his hand. Giving a whip, he tried the weapon several times. Nodding, Adrian undid the whip so that small fiery daggers appeared in his hands. Throwing them to the side and seeing how they were stuck to the ground, still burning for about 7 seconds and then disappeared. If those daggers were to stab into a person, thinking about how that person's meat would end up being cooked caused a disgusted expression to form on the redhead's face. Removing the image from his head, Adrian extended his hands and made several crows of fire form. The crows of fire took flight but always flew around the redhead, protecting him. Making the crows always fly around me will make it a bad idea for someone to get close to me. I can also make someone unable to move. Moving his left hand, the crows moved away from him to start spinning with speed in a specific space. Slightly opening his palm while still controlling the crows, Adrian made them turn into short swords that kept moving in circles at a good speed, and then clenched his fist tightly, causing the swords to stab hard in one place. Then by snapping his fingers the swords glowed for a second, then burst into flames. I can also use this to finish off someone if they fall for that. Extending his right arm, Adrian opened his palm and a torrent of orange fire shot out from it, and its limit was up to about 10 meters. Putting more spirituality, this torrent became thicker and acquired a somewhat darker color, extending up to about 15 meters. Moving his hand to the side, he made the torrent form an arc of fire. Ads by PubFuture. In case I need to separate a group of people, I can use this movement. Sighing slightly, Adrian sat on the floor and crossing his legs began to meditate to recover his lost spirituality. With Monday night having arrived, Adrian re-entered the City of Calamities to continue creating new moves with his firebending to prepare for Thursday. He wanted to have a wide range of movements in case anything happened. That's why he planned to train a lot in the Sephiroth, because it was the only place where no one could spy on what he was doing. As Adrian meditated, his left arm was lightly covered in a yellow powder. Opening his eyes and with the tank fuller, Adrian looked at the dust on his arm and sent a little spirituality. Suddenly the dust shimmered a bit and then condensed to show an image of a red-haired man sleeping inside a room. This will be very useful, Adrian said with a smile. When he had entered the City of Calamities, apart from practicing, it had also been to supply the fire soldier who was taking his place these days. Discovering the golden dust, he passed a little spirituality and a kind of screen was formed that allowed him to see what the soldier did. Using his right hand, Adrian made the screen zoom out further and now he could see his entire house and could even hear the sound outside of it. This is like a mobile security camera. I could use this to scan dangerous areas or even spy on someone. After all, if these fire soldiers can take my appearance, who says they can't take the form of a bird? Adrian said happily as he stopped transmitting spirituality, causing what he showed to disappear little by little until it turned into a yellow dust that wrapped the redhead's arm again, who sighed. The only bad thing is that it consumes my spirituality quite quickly. Maybe I can only use this method to see for about 10 minutes before it dries me up, Adrian spoke sadly as he looked at the City of Calamities from where he was. Ads by PubFuture. What other abilities do you have that I don't know about, and what secrets do you hide? He spoke to the city, but obviously the Sephiroth didn't respond, so he could only shake his head. I will discover your secrets in time. It was the last thing he said before leaving the Sephiroth that returned to its silence, the only thing watching being the soldiers who patrolled eternally and a huge coliseum in the center of the city, which only continued to exist in silence. In a child's room one could see a boy with pale blonde hair lying on his bed staring at the ceiling with a flat gaze. I still feel like the origami paper I gave you is still intact, so why don't you go into the dream? Frowning slightly, the boy could only sigh to better cover himself with the blanket and lie down while hugging a teddy bear. I better wait, after all, while he still has the origami in possession, it will only be a matter of time before we meet. Closing his black eyes, the boy only had a sweet smile as his breathing became calmer. Fate will take care of that. Adrian had opened his eyes after leaving the City of Calamities, and looking around he saw that he was still lying on the sofa in the living room. Getting up from the sofa, Adrian gave a few light stretches. Finished those, the redhead just looked out the window and seeing how the red glow of the moon illuminated the streets, he just closed his eyes. Going back to the sofa, Adrian this time he fell asleep and did not enter the city to continue training. Opening his eyes, Nathan scratched them before going to the bathroom and clean up. Good morning, Nathan. Entering the room he could see how Adrian was already awake and was looking at him with calm eyes. Good morning, boss. Looking at the table in front of the redhead, Nathan just raised an eyebrow at the redhead, who just kept smiling. On the table was a mask and a black windbreaker with a hood. Isn't this what he was wearing when we first met him? Recognizing the mask, Nathan said as he looked at the redhead. Grabbing the windbreaker and pulling it on, Adrian gave him a smile as he pulled on his hood. We can't be sure that our enemies won't attack these days. After all, divination isn't omnipotent, so I'll be guarding you in secret. Boss, are you sure? Sasha entered the room having managed to hear what the redhead had said and asked first. I'm sure, but don't worry, you won't know I'm there, so you can continue with your day in peace. That doesn't comfort anyone, thought Nathan and Sasha at the same time, who had a flat face at the words of the redhead, who had an innocent smile. I'll watch over you while Sasha gets to the Harvest Church and then watch over Nathan for the rest of the day. After all, Sasha will be the safest of the three of us while she is inside the church. The redhead said calmly as he grabbed the mask on the table. Boss, are you sure this is necessary? Adrian let go of his smile and with a serious face looked at Sasha, who broke out in a cold sweat. Sasha, we face unknown enemies with unknown numbers. The only thing we think we know is the day they are going to attack, but that doesn't guarantee anything, so we can only be very careful to avoid any hidden danger that we don't know about. Got it, boss. Ads by PubFuture. Lowering her head slightly, Sasha responded, somewhat embarrassed while looking away. Ignoring this, Adrian only put on his mask and spoke with a more serious and mocking tone of voice. While we're out there, I'll just be Mr. Holmes, do you understand? Understood, Mr. Holmes. Nathan and Sasha responded at the same time, feeling how the man's aura changed slightly to a more dangerous one. Perfect, you can go. Nodding to the couple's words, Adrian pointed to the door as he watched them. Looking at the masked man, Nathan just shuddered as he walked to the door of his house, followed closely by Sasha, both casting discreet glances towards Adrian, who just followed behind calmly. Both having left the house, they waited for Adrian to come out, but when they turned around they discovered that there was no one behind them. Looking from the nearby alley at his two companions who were looking around trying to find him, a smile formed under Adrian's mask. Nathan, we should go. It was Sasha who spoke first after looking for Adrian for a few seconds but not being able to find him. Looking around and still somewhat surprised, Nathan just nodded. You're right, Bo. Mr. Holmes had said that we wouldn't notice that he was watching over for us. Nathan corrected in time, and they took a public carriage on their way to the Harvest Church. Following them closely, Adrian moved between ceiling and ceiling with speed, not being able to be seen by the people on the ground. A sequence 7 hunter's tracking and stamina skill had increased considerably, so following a public carriage was no problem for Adrian. After a while the carriage stopped in front of the Harvest Church and Sasha got out and quickly entered the church before the confused look of the driver. Nathan, who was inside the public carriage, just shook his head and then spoke to the driver. Take me to East Borough. The driver, listening to the request, just nodded and headed towards the destination. Following the carriage using the roofs and alleys, Adrian reached where the red band used to hold their territory. Ads by PubFuture. You just had to work around here, right, Nathan? Adrian thought somewhat bitterly, still remembering his fight against the meat monster. Putting his thoughts aside, Adrian kept watching over Nathan, and he always tried to look around the man for danger, but he couldn't find anything. Although he managed to find a hooded figure of somewhat short height that moved through the crowd of workers approaching slowly towards a dark alley. Wouldn't that be? Looking towards the alley where the figure was going, Adrian managed to see from the roof where he was a group of 5 men talking among themselves. They were unaware of how a short figure entered the alley and was approaching them. One of the men had managed to see the figure, who was now about 4 meters from them, and shouted something alerting the others, but before any of them could do anything the figure moved quickly towards them and drawing a triangular sword it faced them. Yep, it's Miss Sheriff, he thought as he watched as who he suspected to be Zio fought against the men. Though I wonder what she's doing here. Watching as Zio kicked into the stomach of one of the men, Adrian groaned for the poor bastard. If you don't get up from that, friend. It didn't take long for Zio to knock out the last one, but one was crawling trying to get away, but Zio didn't allow it. Instead she grabbed the man's leg and pulled him towards her, then kicked the man while seeming to say something to him. She seems furious. What did those bastards do to make her so angry? Zio was holding the collar of the man's shirt as she tried to interrogate, so she failed to see how one of the men she had knocked out slowly pulled out a revolver and pointed it at her. Shit, how she doesn't realize that, thought Adrian in alarm as he put the burn band on his arm and used a shadow leap to get there. Where is he? Zio yelled loudly as she punched the heavily swollen face of the man who was trying to cover himself. I don't know, I swear, the man said with difficulty as he cried in pain. Before Zio could ask again, the sound of something falling to the ground made her let go of the man as she grabbed her sword and spun around. So she could see how one of the men she had knocked out before had his arm extended towards her, and on the ground there was a revolver. On top of the man, who had his mouth open while drooling, was a figure covered in a black windbreaker and with a gloomy mask on his face watching her. You should make sure that the people you knock out stay knocked out, the man spoke mockingly as he got up from the man and kicked the revolver away. Zio just stared at the man while tightly holding her sword. Who are you? Who are you? It is not necessary to be so aggressive, miss. Seeing that Zio still maintained her posture and did not put away the sword, Adrian shook his head. I'm no one in particular, just a normal Samaritan who saw a person in distress and helped. I had it covered, Zio replied defensively, and Adrian just pointed at the revolver that was to the side. You almost got shot in the back and you wouldn't even know it until the bullet hit you. That's not having it covered to anyone with common sense, he teased as he rested his shoulder on the wall and crossed his arms looking at Zio, who gnashed her teeth. Before they could continue talking, the man that Zio had before had tried to get away, but Zio stepped on the man's leg with force, causing him to let out a scream. Please help me, the man said as he looked at Adrian with swollen eyes while the redhead just tilted his head to the side. Sir, I would recommend that you give the lady what she wants before she makes your face look like a deformed mullet. Damn you. A kick reached his face and Zio grabbed his shirt again as she placed the edge of her sword on the man's neck. This is your last chance, bastard. Tell me where your boss is or say goodbye to this world. Okay, I'll talk. Bringing the sword closer until it drew blood from the man's neck, Zio spoke in a deep voice. Fast. Shit, miss. I knew you had a reputation, but to think that you would be some kind of Batwoman, who would have thought? Seeing how the man trembled with fear and was very pale, Adrian compared this to the famous Bat detective. Mr. Joseph has been busy trying to take the Red Gang's land for himself, but the Red Skeleton and Creed gangs have had the same idea, so he is trying to negotiate with them. The man quickly spoke while sweating profusely and trembling. Hearing the name, Adrian was slightly surprised and looked at Zio with a raised eyebrow. Ads by PubFuture. Mr. Joseph. That's the name of the head of the Black Skull Gang. What would Zio want with someone like that? The documents he had stolen from the Red Band pointed to this boss as one of the craziest and most dangerous, just below the leader of the Red Moon. Hearing this, Zio slapped the man's face several times before speaking again. Where is Joseph? I already told you I don't know. Mr. Joseph moves between this area and ours secretly, and the only one who knows where he is the second in command, Billy Brown. The man shrilled as his pants got wet and an ammonia smell reached Adrian's sensitive nose and he frowned. This guy's kidney must be rotten. Does he even drink water? Zio ignored the smell of urine and she just placed the point of her sword at the man's forehead. Where's Billy? The man was as pale as a dead man and was shaking as if suffering from an extreme case of hypothermia as he stared at the sword. He frequents the Blue Bar and Red Theaters in the Red Street at 8 p.m. You won't have a problem finding him. He is a skinny man with sunken eyes along with a large scar on his left eye. Zio only nodded at the man's words, letting go of his dirty shirt. The man's face lit up with joy, but he only managed to see how a foot collided with his face and then nothing. Clap, clap, clap. Brutal now with the chair. Whistling and clapping at Zio's move, Adrian spoke as Zio shot him a look while still holding her sword. Don't you have a sense of humor? Seeing that his joke went over the head of the woman, Adrian said as he stopped clapping. What is your business with me? I don't have any business with you. Like I said, I'm just a good Samaritan who decided to help. Then why are you still here? Great observation, thought with a smile under his mask, and leaning against the wall, Adrian replied. Ads by PubFuture. I just wanted to see the show and I couldn't leave after hearing that you had business with the leader of the Black Skull. Don't be so aggressive, I'm not part of the gang. He said and added as he watched as Zio almost went against him. Still alert, Zio asked as she watched for any sudden movement from the masked man. May I know why? I'm interested in them and I wouldn't mind helping you deal with them. Of course that depends on whether you're only interested in the leader or in destroying the whole gang. Who are you again? Zio asked seriously as she watched the man move away from the wall and move closer to stand in front of her. You can call me Mr. Holmes. May I know your name, miss? He said as he extended his right hand towards her. Zio had to raise her head in order to look at the man's masked face due to the difference in height. After all, she was barely 1.62 meters tall, with her boots adding 10 centimeters, while the man in front of her was easily 1.84 meters tall. Looking at the outstretched hand, Zio only took a step back as she answered. You can just call me miss. With a small laugh, Adrian lowered his hand as he nodded. Understood, miss. Let's play this game, Miss Judgment, Adrian thought with a smile under his mask. Zio just nodded as she put away she sword. I want you to understand something, Mr. Holmes. We will be working together as long as the leader of the Black Skull lives. When he dies, our collaboration ends. Understood? Understood. We will be in contact through the bar at the bottom of this street. Every Monday and Wednesday we will see each other behind it at 6 p.m. If you are ever absent or do not attend for any reason, our collaboration ends. Miss, is this a job interview or what? We'll talk again tomorrow. Goodbye, Mr. Holmes, Zio said as she left the alley, leaving Adrian and the men she fought earlier alone. Okay guys, I'll let you wallow in piss and dirt by yourself, bye. Looking at these men who couldn't answer, Adrian only bowed slightly and the shadows enveloped him, disappearing from the alley.